Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope the week's gone well. Let me start with some macro thoughts. Anyone else losing track of which peso is moving to record lows because of protests in the country? Latam FX in serious trouble. And that's from V Patel FX. And you see the transmission from the street to the FX rate extremely quickly when you think about it. On the 18th of November, I wrote the pound has risen from multi-year lows like a phoenix and has room to rally further, especially if Bojo builds a big lead. And the latest opinion polls, and this is from V Patel FX again, Conservatives may win 366 seats. Best for Britain survey comes ahead of the YouGov poll. Sterling moves above 129, it's just below 129.50, which suggests a 50-plus Tory majority, still not fully priced in. And V Patel is expecting it to trade to 135 in the event of that majority of above 50-plus. Home thoughts, here we go round the prickly pear, here we go round the prickly pear, the prickly pear, here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Yesterday I was visiting somebody and this was a photograph I took of a courting peacock and it looked rather fantastic, I must admit, and captivated my attention for a little bit and was seemingly untroubled by my presence. Carlos Cruz-Diez, who, as I've discovered recently and I really like, this is Calor Aditivo Panam Circulos 2 Panama 2010. And this is Physichromy 1112 Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, the United States. Political reflections. President Trump is always a digital insurgent, and this was his tweet last night. He photoshopped himself on top of, I think it's Arnold Schwarzenegger's body. And that took me back to Joseph Kabila Kabange, who, sporting a new sartorial look, was giving exclusive interviews to the world's press earlier this year, and in one interview he alluded to Arnold Schwarzenegger's famous quote, "I'll be back," and I was wondering if that's what Trump was alluding to as well. Rudy Giuliani calls Trump to tell him he was joking about having an insurance policy. President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, called the president this week to reassure him that he'd been joking when he told media outlets he had insurance if Trump turned on him in the Ukraine scandal. Giuliani's lawyer said on Wednesday. The attorney Robert Costello said Giuliani, at my insistence, had called Trump within the last day to emphasize that he had not been serious when he said he had an insurance policy if thrown under the bus. He shouldn't joke, he's not a funny guy, I told him. 10,000 comedians are out of work, and you make a joke. It doesn't work that way, Costello told Reuters. He said there had been no change in Trump and Giuliani's relationship. They speak all the time. President Evo Morales, La lucha no termina acá, was the headline of a Telesur TV tweet. And that took me to an article in Global Research. The former US ambassador, Manuel Rocha, said, don't vote for Evo Morales. Evo Morales is the Andean bin Laden, and the cocoa growers are the Taliban. Under his leadership, Bolivia's economic growth increased fourfold, its unemployment Latin America's lowest at 4.2% in 2018. Extreme poverty fell from 38.2% to 15.2% in 13 years. Life expectancy increased by 9 years. The minimum wage rose from $60 to $310. The gender gap in land titling for women was reduced. Bolivia was declared a territory free of illiteracy in 2008. School dropout rate fell from 4.5% to 1.5%. Between 2005 and 2018, infant mortality reduced by 56%. They were in the process of implementing the universal health system. Legislation was passed to provide free medical care for cancer patients. Key natural resources were nationalized. Basic services, including water, electricity, and telecommunications, were recognized as a human right. Morales' ruling Movement for Socialism party opposed US sanctions on Cuba, Venezuela, and other countries. 25th of November, quoting Middle East Eye, which said, "This is a global uprising against neoliberalism." And I said, it does behove us to diagnose the disease, otherwise we will be prescribing the wrong medicine. For example, take Bolivia and Latin America in general, where the prescription of the likes of Janine Áñez and Jair Bolsonaro, "You shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free," is to take neoliberalism to the ultimate extreme. They're killing us like dogs. China and even India are seeking to Xinjiang the periphery. This is a global phenomenon, and my article was primarily about Iran, and I said Iran is similarly reaping a whirlwind. Foreign policy, the Rajapaksas will ruin Sri Lanka's economy. On November 18, Gotabaya Rajapaksa took his oath as Sri Lanka's 7th executive president at the sacred Buddhist temple, Ruwanwelisaya, in Anuradhapura. 3 days later, his brother, former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, was sworn in as Prime Minister. It is no coincidence that Gotabaya's inauguration ceremony occurred at an ancient temple built by Sinhalese King Dutu Gemenu, who is best known for defeating an invading Tamil king from the Chola kingdom. Though the president wrote on Twitter that he was now the president of all Sri Lankans, whether they voted for him or not, and irrespective of their ethnicity or religious beliefs, the swearing-in ceremony indicates that the president will interpret his win as a mandate for reinforcing the Sinhalese Buddhist hegemony. This interpretation advances the view that Sri Lankan minorities are invaders or guests, permitted citizenry only by the grace of Sri Lanka's rightful Sinhalese Buddhist guardians. The Rajapaksa regime is likely to govern based on an anti-pluralistic Sinhala first or Sinhala only orientation, an approach that academics have long held responsible for civil conflict. Radical Sinhalese Buddhist groups loyal to the Rajapaksa's political party, Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna SLPP, such as the Bodu Bala Sena and Nawa Sinhala Ravaya, have been stoking ethnic divisions in the country since at least 2013. When serious intelligence oversights enabled the Easter attacks in April, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was able to seize on ethnic divisions and highlight his own credentials as the efficient defense secretary who helped end Sri Lanka's 26-year civil war. There is a long history of anti-Muslim violence in Sri Lanka, too often overshadowed by the civil war. Islamophobia has risen following the Easter attacks. In May, the leader of one of the country's largest Buddhist chapters called for stoning Muslims to death and spread rumours that Muslim-owned restaurants use sterilization medicine in their food to reduce Sinhalese Buddhist fertility rates. The head of Gotabaya's legal team was even videotaped telling Muslims that if they did not vote for the former defense secretary, Muslims would get a massive thrashing. Mahinda Rajapaksa's human rights record is abysmal. His brother Gotabaya is known within the family as the Terminator. His counter-terrorism strategy during his tenure as defense secretary was characterized by brute force. When a senior military officer and elected official claimed there was eyewitness evidence of the defense secretary ordering army officers to shoot and kill surrendering LTTE leaders at the end of the war, Gotabaya Rajapaksa openly threatened to execute the general during a BBC interview citing treason and betrayal of the country. Tellingly, responses from the President's office have been instead emphasized his commitment to economic development, trade and regional security, tacitly indicating that even the facade of human rights adherence will now be dropped. Amid the rise of authoritarianism in the era of President Trump, Indian Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping, the Rajapaksas can pursue their brand of ethnocratic nationalism with less human rights scrutiny than in the past. Amid the rise of authoritarianism in the era of Trump, they will benefit from relationships strengthened while in opposition, such as those with Russia, whilst also pivoting to China under the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, complete Western disengagement is impossible. After all, the United States, the United Kingdom and Europe are Sri Lanka's top export destinations. Indian government is less concerned by anxieties in Tamil Nadu. While Modi has been trying to make inroads into Tamil Nadu, his 2019 landslide election was secured despite Tamil Nadu overwhelmingly voting against Modi's BJP. Sri Lanka's embrace of ethnocratic populism is part of a broader regional trend. However, as economist Arvind Subramanian has argued, a lack of political inclusion will only exacerbate the country's fragile economic situation. And that's a very important point. If the new opposition chooses to pursue this route instead of focusing on the corruption, communication failures and leadership struggles that derail their own performance, the damage will last generations. Of course, we'd previously gone back to that article, Death of the Tiger in the New Yorker. Just in case anyone forgot, Sri Lanka is now governed by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, a man so sinister he used to keep a tank of sharks in his garden. The mobile phone video clip shows a pair of soldiers pushing a naked, blindfolded man into the frame. His hands are tied behind his back. One soldier, dressed in the uniform of the Sri Lankan army, forces him into a sitting position on the ground, kicks him in the back and steps out of the way as the other soldier comes forward and shoots him in the back of the head. The man's body jolts and flops down. Off camera, the shooter can be heard laughing giddily and exclaiming, "It's like he jumped." The soldiers kill 2 other men in similar fashion and then dispatch a number of wounded prisoners. The camera turns to show at least 8 other bodies, including those of several half-naked women, lying in pools of blood. All of them appear to have been freshly executed. That was the fight against Prabhakaran, who was considered a master of battlefield innovation and devised a form of execution for collaborators with the enemy. The victim was tied to a lamppost and blown to pieces with Cordex explosive fuse wire. Rajapaksa didn't drink, he said, and he didn't know what he had in the house. He knew only he had a bottle of Fonseca, Would we like a drink of that? He grinned. On the trolley was a bottle of Fonseca bin number 27, a brand of port. After dinner, Gotabaya led us outside. Across his lawn, by the garden's high-security wall, was a huge illuminated outdoor aquarium. Inside, several large, unmistakable shapes moved relentlessly back and forth. Are those sharks? I asked him. Yes, he said. Do you want to see them? We crossed the lawn and stood in front of the tank, which was 8 feet tall and 20 feet wide. There were 4 sharks, each about 4 feet long, swimming among smaller fish. Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, denounced an outbreak of deadly unrest in the country as a very dangerous conspiracy. Authorities said about 731 banks and 140 government sites were torched in the disturbances. My article on the 25th of November was quoting Javad Zarif: if Iran wants to eat, it has to obey the US. India's Consul General in the United States calls for the Israeli model in Kashmir, according to Middle East Eye. At a private event on Saturday in New York City, Sandeep Chakravorty, India's Consul General to the city, told Kashmiri Hindus and Indian nationals that India will build settlements modelled after Israel for the return of the Hindu population to Kashmir. It has happened in the Middle East. If the Israeli people can do it, we can also do it, he said. I don't know why we don't follow it. I think the return of Kashmiri Pandits is being instrumentalized to justify a settler colonial project in Kashmir. Mona Ban, Associate Professor at Syracuse University. The conflation of Kashmiri Pandits with Indian Hindus and talk of an Israeli model means that you're preparing for Kashmiri Pandits to return as settlers. This is a photograph of Kashmir from the Kashmiris Twitter handle, and as I've written before, the frontier from Xinjiang similarly being treated to what this fellow is proposing in Kashmir and the Gaza Strip, from Xinjiang to Kashmir, from Gaza to Crimea, from Hong Kong to Taiwan, I wrote, are 21st century flashpoints. If you are in Kashmir, which was described by Nehru as the snowy bosom of the Himalayas and which is currently switched off from the 21st century, and where Prime Minister Narendra Modi revoked Article 370, which protected Kashmir's demography by restricting residency to Kashmiris alone, and under a subsection known as Article 35A, forbade the sale of property to non-Kashmiris, I concluded essentially Modi is seeking to flood the zone, which is, I think, exactly what that Consul General was talking about. Trump signs Hong Kong bill backing protesters and angering China. The bill requires annual reviews of Hong Kong's special trade status under American law, as well as sanctions against any officials deemed responsible for human rights abuses or undermining the city's autonomy. I signed these bills out of respect for President Xi, China, and the people of Hong Kong, he said. They are being enacted in the hope that leaders and representatives of China and Hong Kong will be able to amicably settle their differences, leading to long-term peace and prosperity for all. Trump had little choice but to sign the bill. The House cleared it 417 to 1 on November 20, after the Senate passed it without opposition. Majorities that would allow lawmakers to override any veto by the president. If America does not speak out for human rights in China because of commercial interests, we lose all moral authority to speak out elsewhere. Nancy Pelosi. Last week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Kentucky Republican, called on the president to speak out, saying that the world should hear from him directly that the United States stands with the protesters. Hong Kong's economy is reeling from the protests. There are some charts from the Financial Times. Government has forecast the city will experience its first annual recession since the global financial crisis in 2009. Hong Kong's economy continues to get hit by the double whammy of domestic political turmoil and US-China trade tensions. International visitors are hugely important to Hong Kong, a city with a large overseas population. Last year, 28 million people visited the city of 7.4 million. Value of Hong Kong goods and services exports, which includes tourism spending, is nearly double that of its GDP, a ratio that is second only to that of Luxembourg. In the first 3 months to September, tourism arrivals in Hong Kong fell by 26% compared with the same period last year, the second largest drop since records began in the early 1990s. Hotel occupancy rate has dropped to 63%, a decade low according to data from the Hong Kong Tourism Board. Retail sales have plunged. Value of Swiss watch exports to Hong Kong dropped 30% compared with the same month in the previous year. Driven by a sharp fall in sales of luxury goods, Hong Kong retail sales fell in August at the fastest pace since records began in 1982. And what's so fascinating is you always have these photographs of riot police and protesters in the heart of Hong Kong's financial district, and typically they're in front of something like Louis Vuitton or a similar luxury brand retailer. As I've said before, prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities, and accelerate the negative feedback loop. And I also wrote the feedback loop and the risks of dieback, where we enter a phase of cascading system collapse. And I think that applies to economies as well as nature. Unless we're going to Xinjiang the whole world, I wrote on the 21st of October, the current modus operandi is running on empty. Xi Jinping, the crusher of bones and his algorithmic control, the Chinese dream has become a nightmare at the boundaries of the Han Empire. I'm sure Xi sees Hong Kong and Taiwan like a virus, and is looking to impose a quarantine just like he has imposed on Xinjiang, but I don't think it's possible. As I've said before, the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form, not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. Bashar al-Assad has had an interview in Paris Match. Un terroriste est un terroriste, français ou étranger, ils seront soumis à la loi syrienne. Which took me back to October 2015 and Lavrov, who said if it looks like a terrorist, if it acts like a terrorist, if it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist, right? Which seems to be what Bashar is saying as well. It takes only 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. The next stage is crisis. It may take only 6 weeks. Listen to this ex-KGB agent's eerily prescient account of active measures of how Russia seeks to destroy its enemies through chaos. That's via Carol Cadwalla. That took me back to my article in December 2016. We have a deviate tomahawk. So much has happened in 2016, from the Brexit vote to President-elect Trump, and it certainly feels like we've entered a new normal, I wrote. One common theme is a parabolic Putin rebound. At this moment, Putin has Fortress Europe surrounded. The intellectual father of the new zeitgeist that propelled Brexit, Le Pen, the five-star movement in Italy, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands is Vladimir Putin. In the Middle East, it is Putin who's calling the shots in Aleppo. But then I turned to the election of Trump because I said hindsight will surely show that Russia ran a seriously sophisticated program of interference, mostly digital. The first thing is plausible deniability. The second thing is non-linearity. I was quoting Pepe Grillo, who was the comic leader turned founder of the Five-Star Movement, who said, "This is the deflagration of an epoch. It is the apocalypse of the information system, of the TVs, of the big newspapers, of the intellectuals, of the journalists." And I said, he's right. Traditional media has been disrupted and insurgents can broadcast live and over the top, which I think is the defining difference between Trump and Nixon. From feeding the hothouse conspiracy frenzy online, a constant state of destabilized perception, timely and judicious doses of WikiLeaks leaks which drained Hillary's bona fides and her turnout and motivated Trump's, what we have witnessed is something remarkable and noteworthy. And I concluded by saying Putin has proven himself an information master and his adversaries are his information victims. Moving to the currency markets, the euro, which dipped below 110 yesterday, is now at 110.09. Dollar index 98.316. Japanese yen, which has been softening up, 109.44. Swiss franc 0.9998. The pound 129.44. Strong move. Australian dollar 0.766. India rupee 71.2475. South Korean won 1176.95. The Rial close to a record low at 426.05. Egyptian pound 16.12. The Rand 14.75. The dollar index has been in this relentless channel throughout the year. This is a chart from the market ear, and we're last at 98.316. Euro-dollar volatility are at 1 month lows at 3.95%, basically pricing 0.25% daily moves. That took me back to Halcyon days, when storms do not occur. Today the term is used to denote a past period that is being remembered for being happy and or successful. This is a euro-dollar chart, dropped below 110, but now back above that level. Gold, 1456, though there are reports in the media that there's been massive call option buying, so that's an interesting development. Crude oil, $57.75. I think we're still targeting 60 and even 62.50. And my calculation is that it's purely a supply side issue. Emerging market currencies are down 45% against the dollar since 2011 as a result of lower GDP growth, lower commodity prices, large economic imbalances and political unrest, according to J.S. Blokland. Sub-Saharan Africa, right-wing German AfD leader Goland is pitching for birth control in Africa. Population explosion is the biggest environmental problem. That's from Ali Ozkok. There's a short video. I campaigned like hell, but if I lose, I will accept that. I am a Democrat. Geingob in Namibia told reporters shortly after voting. The opposition party leader, McHenry Vinani, said he was very confident of winning. Results are expected in about 24 hours. French flag burns in Mali, where Islamists overrun exhausted army. One of the worst losses of life in France's military in more than 3 decades. 13 dead soldiers during an anti-terrorism mission in Mali shines a light on the uncomfortable fact that its mission in a former colony is a shambles. France intervened in 2013 to stop a loose alliance of ethnic Tuareg separatists and Islamist fighters from moving south toward the capital. Its troops were hailed by jubilant crowds. Restaurants and bars even flew the French national flag. Now demonstrators are burning it. In recent protests, many have carried posters that read, "Get out of France, we don't want to see you here." Salif Keita, one of Mali's best-loved musicians, released a video this month on his Facebook page in which he tells President Ibrahim Boubacar, stop subjecting yourself to little Emmanuel Macron. He's just a kid sitting at what appears to be a kitchen table and speaking in the Bambara language. Keita goes on to say France is financing Mali's enemies, the jihadists. This sentiment against the French military presence is not just measurable in Mali, but also in Niger and Burkina Faso, said Christian Bouquet, a French geopolitics research and specialist of Africa at Bordeaux's Montaigne University. It is not surprising but difficult to address. Macron, who has his own vision of Europe's place in the world, sees Africa's fight against terrorism as key for the continent's own security. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe replied that France is waging a rude fight, a fight against men, gangs that try to destabilize states and then to destabilize us. Question won't go away. The Conservative Figaro newspaper described the situation as a dead end. We're exhausted, Defence Minister Ibrahim Dahiru Dembele, an army general, told Parliament this month. You're right to be scared. Even me, the defense minister, is scared. Really, we're in trouble. I concluded by saying Emmanuel Macron needs to interrogate the Kremlin and their political technologists, because I think they're pushing back very, very hard against the French presence in Africa. I wrote about Russia and Africa from Russia with Love, quoted Putin, our African agenda is positive and future-oriented. We do not ally with someone against someone else, and we strongly oppose any geopolitical games involving Africa. Andrew Korybiko writes Moscow invaluably fills the much-needed niche of providing its partners there with democratic security, or in other words, the cost-effective and low-commitment capabilities needed to thwart color revolutions and resolve unconventional wars. To simplify, Russia's political technologists have reportedly devised bespoke solutions for confronting incipient and ongoing color revolutions, just like its private military contractors have supposedly done the same when it comes to ending insurgencies. Benin accuses the EU ambassador of subversive activities. US and Britain on Wednesday expressed concern over elections in Tanzania, where President Magufuli's party won 99% of the seats, saying the vote lacked credibility. CCM party ran almost entirely unopposed in local government polls on November 24. Opposition boycotted, citing violence and intimidation that rights groups say have become a hallmark of Magufuli's rule. His party clinched most of the 16,000 seats for street and village elder leaders, influential posts essential for grassroots campaigning ahead of polls next year, in which Magufuli is expected to seek re-election. All the parties basically refused to take part. This troubling development calls into question the credibility of the election process and results. The US Embassy in Tanzania. Sarah Cook, the British High Commissioner, coordinated disqualification of opposition candidates contributed toward voters being denied their right to choose their own leaders freely and fairly. President Magufuli, boycotting an election is also democratic, he told a rally. Guinea-Bissau leader loses vote as ex-prime ministers head for runoff. This is Jose Maria Vaz, who will be one of the first Guinea-Bissau leaders to finish their term, was eliminated from the country's presidential election after two former prime ministers qualified for next month's runoff. Vaz only got 12% of ballots cast. South African all shares up 6.52% year to date. Dollar rand is at 14.75. In 2016, Egypt was forced to liberalize an overvalued currency and cut subsidies to get a $12 billion bailout from the IMF. Since then, foreign currency reserves are booming and the stock market is 62% bigger than its post-float low. I was praising Sisi for his economic policies, as you know. Egypt has done extremely well. Obviously, he took very hardcore decisions, and it was the level of repression in many ways which allowed him to shovel those through. Egyptian pound 16.12, EGX 30 up 5.55% year to date. Nigeria all share down 14.76% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index down 14.37% year to date. Watch the reactions from President Kenyatta and his Deputy President Dr. William Ruto during the BBI report event. That's via KTN News. That took me to What the Face Reveals, Basic and Applied Studies of Spontaneous Expression Using the Facial Action Coding System, which is one of the best books I've read. And it's practically a science, but then just watch that video. And then there's some photographs put out by the African Queen Mum. Similarly, you might analyze them. Yesterday's events at the Bomas of Kenya took me back to Saddam Hussein's very public purge when he first came into power and he was smoking his cigar. Centum reported first half earnings per share surged 214.7%. Half year sales were down 0.894%. Trading profit was down 34.732%, but they reported a 205% surge in investment and other income. Operating profit up 291%. They took an impairment on the Amu Power, which I'll get to. Earnings per share up 214%. They closed out the half year with about $180 million in cash equivalent. Private equity business recorded 8.4 billion shilling consolidated operating profit for the period, compared to 1.3 billion for the similar period. Completed the disposal of its stakes in Almasi Beverages, Nairobi Bottlers and King Beverage Limited, realizing a net gain of 12 billion shillings. So that was the big driver that juiced the earnings. Real estate business unit group is pursuing a sales-led development model, is currently constructing 1,316 residential units across its 3 mixed-use developments: Two Rivers, Vipingo and Kilifi, Pearl Marina in Uganda. Of the 1,316 units under construction, 827 units with a revenue potential of 6.1 billion have been sold over the last 12 months, representing a pre-sale level of 63%. They hold 2.8 billion shillings worth of marketable securities. Took a one-off impairment of 2.3 billion, of which 2.1 billion is against the debt instrument investment in Amu Power Company Limited, which is the coal project. A decrease in net asset value from 52.6 billion to 50.3 billion is attributable to those provisions. There is a link for the investor briefing, a link for the consolidated income statement. I thought there were strong results juiced by the disposal of its stakes in the bottling companies, and whilst that's a one-off, it speaks to their facility in getting in and out of positions profitably. But it looks to me now overwhelmingly a real estate play. Williamson Tea reported earnings per share negative 3 shillings and 61 cents, but that was an improvement of 17.58%. Cash and cash equivalents down 41.889%, which is not good. With our crops on average 15% below last year, we may have expected prices to rise to compensate for some of the crop loss. Aside from a brief period, this has not materialized, as enormous carry-over of unsold stock from other tea producers negated a prolonged dry weather spike in prices. A regrettably gloomy but unfortunately realistic picture. Captuoria Tea, which is a sister company, reported an EPS loss of 1 shilling and 93 cents, which is an 80.246% improvement. Turnover was down sharply, 46.38%. Loss per share, 1 shilling and 93 cents versus a 9 shilling and 77 cent loss last time round. Repeating the same thing that Williamson is saying, but also adding, we do not envisage much change going forward, and it is unlikely we will make up our crop deficits in the months to March 2020, or that prices will rise. So gloomy. Mose Hezbon has tweeted a chart of the Kenya shilling, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Nairobi all shares up 11.01%, NSE 20s down 7.84%. The ICC just released an internal investigation into its failures in handling the Kenya case. Scathing stuff, a must read, tweeted Martina Stevis. It's very interesting. Trial teams attempted to deal with this serious blow to their cases by quite rightly requesting the judges to admit the prior statements of these witnesses, but were ultimately unsuccessful. Absent the witness interference campaign, it is very possible the prosecution would have been successful in the case against Ruto. Even absent this interference, it is much less likely the prosecution would have prevailed in the other cases. Thanks for stopping by.